Hey everyone, I want to talk today about instantaneous healing, which sounds absolutely amazing and crazy and impossible, maybe? I don't know, let's see. Um, First, I want to talk a little bit about how the nervous system changes, and there are different types of changes in the nervous system that we are all very, very aware of, some that happen very slowly and some that happen very quickly. So things can change slow and things can change fast, and I want to just explain and break down a little bit about how that happens so that you can understand what instantaneous healing is. So anyway, the first thing that people understand is that things can go in one direction or another. You can have sort of a growth where there's improvement in function, or you can have some sort of a decline or deterioration of the system. So those things that happen slowly over time, we would attribute to, if they're growing and changing over time, we call it plastic changes. There's actually changes in our body, changes in our nervous system that happen over time. And those are basically by doing something repeatedly, you're changing the way your body is functioning. At the same time, we can have degeneration that follows along the same path. Over time, you do something in a certain way or you fail to do something, and there'll be changes in the nervous system and changes in the body that will lead to a lesser and lesser level of function over time. So those things are within the sort of parallel of time and changes that we're all very used to seeing. So is it possible to have instantaneous healing? Well, let's look at the sort of parallel to what we just discussed with plastic and degenerative changes. When we have a trauma, traumas happen in an instant. So traumas happen, in a sense, almost outside of the scale of time. They happen so instantaneously that there's a very, very short moment of time that creates a change in function, and I'll explain that more in detail. There'll be an immediate change in function and or immediate sort of trauma or impact or force to the body that changes something, and it creates some sort of an imprint or a different way of function following that period of time. And we can all see that. And very often we attribute that to some change in the tissue. You know, you damage a ligament or you damage, some joint or some other structure, you break a bone. These are traumas. Can traumas heal instantaneously in the same way that they were created? So in other words, the same way that a poor function or disintegration of the system happens in a moment, is it possible to reverse that in a moment? Yes and no. Obviously, if it's a broken bone, no, that takes time to heal. There's something that's physically broken that needs to heal. However, there are other functions that happen instantaneously. So this is something that we see every day in practice, and it's sort of looks like a miracle cure. Someone can't walk or they can't do a certain thing, we do something to them, and then suddenly it works again. It's no great surprise to neurologists. We understand this mechanism. Um, and so basically, in order to understand how things can heal instantaneously, we have to also understand what trauma is and how trauma works sort of outside that scope of time. In other words, something so fast, it doesn't actually sort of have that many ticks on the clock. It's just a millisecond or a split second thing that happens that creates a change in the system. So could we do something in a split second that could actually reverse that trauma? And in many cases, the answer is yes. So that's what I want to talk about. How do we have instantaneous healing? It's basically, is it an anti-trauma? In a sense, yes, it is. So let's look at what trauma is, and then we can understand a little bit about what an anti-trauma or sort of instantaneous healing would be. And really what I mean by that is that not that your system just instantly heals, but that you instantly have a return to function, or you instantly have a reversal of the effects of that trauma. So let's look quickly at what that is. I have more videos on trauma, but I'm going to give a brief overview of what trauma is. So the way that trauma happens is it's a force that happens to the body, some sort of an impact. We're looking at sort of physical forces, say for instance like a whiplash type of accident where you have a crash in the car, the head gets thrown forward, and then the head doesn't work so well anymore. We see the joints aren't working very well after that. So let's look at what that is. What it is there's a force that creates a high degree of acceleration or deceleration, however you want to look at it. So in other words, your muscles are meant to hold your head on top of your shoulders. But if your car stops very quickly, your seatbelt will hold your body, but your head will be flung forward very, very quickly. Now, normally when you have a stretch on a muscle, your body will respond by making that muscle contract up to a point. If there's a sufficient degree of force or a sufficient degree of deceleration or acceleration, what that means is that the movement is so quick that your body doesn't have the ability to respond quickly enough, or even the capacity to. If it were to try to hold that muscle that's holding the joint with that high degree of force, you would actually rip the muscles apart. So we have like a protective mechanism in the body that when it senses a very high degree of load or a high degree of force on that muscle, so in other words, muscles being stretched at the back of your neck very quickly, it will actually create a reflex to reset that muscle to a longer length and make it relax. So, in other words, if you have a very high force and a whiplash, your head will get flung forward so fast that it switches off the muscles at the back of your neck so that your head can just go further without it actually ripping the muscles or breaking your neck. So that's an important thing. It's a good mechanism. However, what it ends up doing is the forces will go into the ligaments. We can have injury to the ligaments in the back of the neck in this example. And then also what ends up happening is that effect of that trauma is long lasting because you're actually changing the length of that muscle on a long-term basis. We say resetting the gain of the muscle, in other words, resetting that length of that muscle to a new longer length. So after a trauma, the muscles that are supporting the joint will be longer. When your body tells all the muscles of your neck to turn on, all of the rest of the muscles will turn on at the right level. But then when we get to this one that's been lengthened, when your brain tells it to turn on, it can't contract quite as effectively as the other ones. So if your body says, turn these muscles on, your head goes to the side like this, these muscles should contract to try to bring you back. This one that's been traumatized won't be able to have the same level of effect. So that's how trauma ends up affecting how our joints are functioning over time following the trauma. Now, can that trauma be instantaneously healed? Yes, it can, and very often is. If we are very specific with our treatments, we can elicit a similar type of force to reverse that muscle length change. In other words, we can take that muscle, which is very loose, and create a situation where it then activates and can be strong and of the right tone. So when your body tells that muscle to contract, it can contract appropriately, as with all the other muscles in that chain of control. So the way that happens, I'm going to try to keep this brief as well, I have lots more videos on this, is that when you have a trauma that throws a joint forward, the muscles on the back left of the joint, this is my left, will be stretched and lengthened. But what will end up happening is it's harder for them to contract. But when they are contracting, they'll turn off the opposite muscles. But if they can't contract, they can't turn off the opposite muscles and they will get tight. So you'll end up in a situation where the joint kind of stays in this sort of position because this muscle on this side can't contract to turn this one off. And so it ends up being longer and this one gets tighter. So if you can take the joint, and this is actually the traumatized position. So if you can take the joint from its traumatized position and create a very similar stretch, so very high degree of force, so very fast stretch of this muscle, which is uninhibited, in other words, very tight, we can stretch this muscle by moving the joint back towards a neutral position very quickly. If we just move it back to a neutral position, but very fast, we'll elicit a similar response to make this muscle relax. But rather than the original trauma where the joint was thrown too far forward and beyond its normal range of motion, if we take it from its traumatized position and move it back to a neutral position, then we can very effectively change the resting state of that muscle and reset its gain to a balance with the muscle of the opposite side, and effectively instantaneously heal that joint. So yes, there's your answer. It is possible to have instantaneous healing. That's a very brief overview. And there's much, much more to be said on this. I just wanted to get a little bit of an idea out there that yes, it is possible for things to heal. You don't need to treat a joint 10 or 20 times for it to be fixed. If we can do this very, very precisely, it's very, very possible. Not possible, it happens every day. We fix these things. So it's very, very easy to resolve these things if we learn precision and we adjust those joints back to a neutral position without any further compromise to the mechanics of the joint. So I hope that's of interest to you. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned. If you have any questions, just drop them in the comments and I'll be glad to address those. Thanks again.